I'm very excited to introduce our featured guest speaker. Let me do a little introduction. Roger Bright. He's lived an eclectic life, as he says. He holds a Master of Science in Mathematics from Northern Illinois University, a Master of Science in Management from the Sloan School of MIT. His career includes teaching high school mathematics, managing an international chemical business, operating a management consulting company, and most recently, he spent 10 years with the Batavia Chamber of Commerce. He chaired the Batavia 4th of July fireworks for 17 years. He works with teens in an anti-alcohol and an anti-drug program, and has spent more than 2,500 hours answering calls on the suicide hotline. But today, Roger loves challenging audiences to see how their thinking keeps them from finding true happiness and success. He and Judy, his wife of 32 years, have 2 grown children, and they live right here in Batavia, Illinois. So I'm pleased to introduce Roger Bright, our featured guest speaker today.
Thank you, Kimberly. I appreciate that. That was as nice an introduction as I think I've ever had, so thank you. When Susan Cox started to talk and she says, if you have a lot, I'm thinking, I don't have a lot of anything. So if I told you you have the power to change the future course of human history, would you believe me? Or would you say I was crazy? That's the question I want to explore with you this morning, but first, a couple of things. First one is, as Kimberly said, there's a couple of places in my life where I have learned more about what it means to be human than anywhere else in my life. The first one is, over 12 years, I have had the privilege and the honor of spending more than 2,500 hours answering calls on a suicide hotline. I've had the ability to spend moments with people, the most difficult times in their life, and walk with them as they have moved from wanting to end their life to reaffirming why they want to live. It is extremely rewarding work, as you can imagine, but also at Operation Snowball, which is a teen anti-drug, anti-alcohol program. I've spent also thousands of hours with young people and learned how many of them have been given incredibly difficult lives to live. Dysfunctional families, alcoholic parents, depression, suicide, you name it. I've been there. So I speak to you this morning partly through some of that experience. I want to begin with a diagram. Kinesis triangle. I use this because it illustrates something very important about how the human brain operates. 2 triangles, white one and a blue one. How many of you think the white triangle is larger than the blue one? How many think the blue one is larger? How many think they're the same size? See, I love that because there are no triangles in that picture. There are 6 independent blue shapes, and your brain makes up the rest. The human brain is marvelous at pattern making. We do it all the time. And it's very useful, in fact, life-saving. When you're driving down the road and the light goes from green to yellow, it's useful to be able to complete that pattern and say, I think red is next. Probably save your life. But on the other hand, because the brain does this pattern making continuously, if you see somebody at the other side of the room and they're a different age, or their skin is a different color, or their hair is purple, and we make up some picture of their life from these little bits and pieces of information, we call that prejudice. How many of us have seen 3 words on the bumper sticker of a car and made up the entire life story of the person behind the wheel? Guilty as charged. So pattern making, it is very, very powerful. Your brain does it all of the time. And it's useful. Sometimes it gets us into trouble. The other thing about kinesis triangle, though, is once you see those 2 triangles, the blue one and the white one, how easy is it to see those 6 shapes as independent? It becomes very difficult because they become intricately connected. So this one simple diagram shows you how your brain makes things up that probably aren't there about the world and about people. And once you do make those things up, it's hard to see what's really there. So how does this show up in people's lives? So not long ago, I was talking to a 13-year-old girl who was being bullied mercilessly at school. And I mean, I don't know about you or me when we were that age, but now it's 24/7, 365, on social media and text messages and everything else. And this young girl was being told constantly, you're ugly, you're stupid, and you're fat. One text message told her the world would be better off if she would drink some bleach. But when I asked her what was the most difficult part of all of that, about ripped my heart out when she said, I think they're right, I am ugly, stupid, and fat. So those patterns that people were writing into her life made it impossible for her to see what was really there. Just rips your heart out. But here's the thing, many of you have got grandchildren, maybe some of you have got great-grandchildren or grandnephews, grandnieces who are in that same teenage years. And I won't engage in the conversation of whether their teenage years are more difficult than mine or yours when we were that age, because we won't know. But I can tell you that it's difficult today. With social media beating them up all the time, they post something on Facebook and their friends get 100 likes and they get 5, and they beat themselves up for that. It's 24/7, 365. Those kids, I'm back. Those kids are often frightened, they're scared, they're confused, sometimes they're depressed. And whether you know this or not, the second leading cause of death amongst teenagers in this country today is suicide. So here's the dirty little secret, they're not telling anyone. They're putting on a happy face, and they're not telling anyone of their confusion and their fright and how scared they are and concerned for their future. And why aren't they? The reasons are myriad. One of them is, mom and dad are already struggling with so many things. Dad's out of work. We don't have any insurance. I can't get counseling. I can't lay this on my parents, not now. Or I have an older brother or a cousin or my dad or somebody in the family who's already seeing a counselor. They're suffering from bipolar. I can't tell my parents that I'm suffering as well. I just can't. Or they'll tell me, wait, you don't understand. People see me as the strong one. I'm not the one who suffers in the family, and I can't change that impression that people have of who I am, so I can't do that. Or the worst one, nobody cares. Nobody cares that I'm sad or suffering. I have no one in my life for whom it would make a difference. At Operation Snowball, we meet every Thursday night, and we have 2 weekend retreats every year. A brief story about 2 years ago, a young woman, a teenage girl, who I had come to know and care for quite a bit at Operation Snowball. I had known her for a couple of years. She came up to me one Thursday night, and as we always do at Snowball, we give each other a hug. And she said, Roger, how are you? And I said to her, I'm even better now that you're here. Thinking that was the end of that story. Let me come back to it in a moment. There's a quote that I love from Neil Postman. Children are the messages we send to a time that we won't see. And I don't know about you, but that gets me right here. It reminds me of my mortality and that someday I won't be here. And I worry about, will anybody have cared that I was? Will it have mattered to anybody? Will my life have made a difference? And what Neil Postman reminds me is that if there's a legacy I live, it lives on in any other human being that I touch. When I touch their heart, their soul, when I change them in some small way, that moves on into the future. A piece of me will live on through them and through their children and their grandchildren. And even though in the moment it may seem as the impact that I'm having is inconsequential or meaningless, the wings of butterflies tell us otherwise. In 1961, there was an MIT meteorologist by the name of Edward Norton Lorenz who was doing weather predictions. And in 1961, he didn't have access to a supercomputer, so he was using handheld calculator. And in order to simplify his calculations, in one of his predictions, in one of his models, in one of his mathematical expressions, he simplified a number by just dropping some of the far out decimal places. Insignificant change. To his amazement, what he discovered was that the predictions changed dramatically by making a very small change in the initial conditions. It became known as the butterfly effect. It's often said that a butterfly flapping its wings in one part of the world can, over time and distance, change the course or intensity of a tornado in a completely different part of the world. The universe is very sensitive to initial conditions. When we change some small thing in this moment, over time and distance, the future changes dramatically. So let me return to this young woman who I had gotten to know so well, and Thursday night she came over to give me a hug and ask me how I was. Perhaps 6 months later, we were on one of our weekend retreats. She had the opportunity to speak to the 150 of us who were on this retreat. And let me tell you her story that I didn't know. It turns out that her home life had become exceedingly difficult through no fault of her own whatsoever. She's a dear. No fault of hers whatsoever. Her home life had become exceedingly difficult, so difficult, in fact, she felt powerless, she felt worthless, she felt she had no value whatsoever. And at one point it got so bad, the pain was so intense that she felt maybe it would be better if she simply ended her life. And it was a Thursday, one of her very worst moments. She decided instead of skipping our snowball meeting, she came anyway. She saw me across the room. She came over and she gave me a hug and she said, "Roger, how are you?" And for some reason, I don't know, I said, "I'm even better now that you're here." 7 words. And what she told those 150 people at the snowball weekend, that it was in that moment, because Roger, who she knew and cared for and trusted, because Roger would say that to her. Clearly her life was worth living and suicide no longer became an option. So the question is, do you have the power to change the future course of human history? The answer is absolutely you do. All you have to do is touch the life of another human being and change the initial conditions, and over time and distance, everything changes. But especially if you touch the life of a child. And how do you do that? First thing is you have to show up. See, I don't think it was the 7 words that I used with that young woman that changed her. I think it was who I was and the fact that who I was said that to her. I think we have to show up in the world as who we were meant to be. How many of us live our whole lives on the suicide hotline? I talk to so many adults, women who tell me, my father always told me I wasn't worth anything more than this, and so I guess I'm not. How many of us grow up with patterns and stories about who we are that aren't true, but we live them throughout our entire life? So the first thing is, figure out who is that magnificent, generous, kind, loving person that you were sent here to be, and be that person. Because that's how you change the lives of other people. And us seniors, we suffer from a reputation when you talk to people about seniors. Often what people will say, I was with a friend of mine not too long ago, and he said, There's a problem with a lot of older people. They can be very opinionated and stuck in their ways, and they think they know how the world operates. And they're willing to tell you it's like 200 pounds of opinions walking the earth. And we do suffer from that. So when you enter a conversation, here's my plea. Enter it with the most profound questions that you know in your life. Because sentences that end with periods close down the possibility of a new future. Sentences that end with that ubiquitous question mark open up the possibility for a conversation with someone else where a new future can emerge. So when we enter the world authentically as that marvelous, blessed, generous, loving person that you were sent here to be, and you engage the world with your most profound questions, in those moments, you become an elder instead of just being older. And when you do, you plant seeds for a brand new future. Future that none of us can predict, and over time and distance can be truly remarkable. And so my final plea for all of you is, would you begin today? Because for some of us and from some of the people in our lives, tomorrow just might be one day too late. With that, I thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very provocative, makes you really think, but there's just the importance of touching and listening. So a great message. Thank you, Roger, for joining me.